I'm living a double life. And this guy's name was Ken Kostreva, a great friend of mine. And he, kind of like my dad, was super gracious. And what he did was he said, you know what, you should come live with us. And I was like, that's an interesting response to this. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to live in like a house of Christian guys. Like, I don't really have my life together. He's like, you don't need to have your life together. Just come live with us. And I was like, I'll think about that. Over that summer, I decided I did want to take him up on that invitation. But I was like, I need to sort of change the way I live if I'm going to live with these guys. And I went to my dad that summer because I couldn't think if I thought, the life that I'm on is dangerous and I don't want to live it anymore, but I don't know like what I want my life to look like. All I could think about was my dad, who was steady, who was loving, who was like drawing me in even when I was pushing him out. And I really wanted to sort of confess and talk to him about all the things that I've been going through, but I was just too scared to bring it up. Like over and over I thought, okay, I'm going to talk to him tonight and I just couldn't do it. He invited me that summer on a trip to Toronto with him. He was working with Prison Fellowship Ministries at the time. And I remember we went out to dinner, and at dinner, he, out of the blue, just started telling me this kinds of stuff that he struggled with when he was in high school and college, i.e. just being vulnerable, stuff that I never knew before. And it was that night, like at the dinner table, listening to him be honest with me about the rocky times in his walk with the Lord, that I was finally like, I have some things I'd actually want to talk to you about too. And that night was a pivot. It totally changed my life because I asked his forgiveness about a lot of things. He gave me his forgiveness about a lot of things. And I left that trip on Toronto. I went back to UVA and I started living in a communal house with a bunch of other Christian guys. And that was the point where it was not just repenting in my head anymore, but the Lord started leading me into a different life. I started walking differently. And I look back on that story and I think it was entirely because of other people coming into my life and being gracious with me when I was broken, being honest with me. And that I lived my remaining 3 years in this house at UVA called the House of Pain. It was my sister says that my mother cried when she first saw the house and realized that I was living here because it was so run down. I don't know how landlords get away with this, but to me it was amazing. Like the carpets were pretty dirty, and I lived in the basement of the house, which was odd, flooded often. But I lived with these 7 other guys in this radical community. I remember our first year there, we read through Bonhoeffer's Life Together, which if you've never read it, it is still one of the most classic and best works on Christian community. You should read it. I read it again recently, and it was like I had never read it before almost. It was just, everything was new again. And the Lord, just totally changed my life. I continued to walk with my friends Matt and Steve through that time. And, and I told you a lot of the rest that, now, even in this really busy season of parenting and jobs, what we learned at college was a form that the Lord has used to carry us a long way. So that's the story. I just wanted 3 verses and 3 points about stages of life there, and then I'll open it up for questions. So 1, to you, either adolescents or parents of adolescents, I just want to note the reality of, I had been walking with the Lord. I was in a youth group. It is very possible to live a double life. It's also very possible for your children, who you've tried to do the best for, to totally fall off the path, right? And James 5:16 says, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Bonhoeffer has a great part in Life Together where he just talks about nobody is surprised that you're a sinner. And so I just, to you who, if you're in that stage, or if you're worried about that stage, one of the most beautiful parts of the gospel is Jesus knows that you are a sinner. He knows that your children are sinners. He knows that your friends are sinners. He knows that we are broken. And when we hide it, we are running from the gospel. But it's the times that when we encounter other people and realize, I should come out of hiding. those are the times where the gospel really comes alive to us. And so part of what I want to comfort you with is that it's totally possible to be in church and yet living a double life, and that might not be a comfort. The comfort would be, why hide? Like, what do you have to gain by hiding? You have everything to lose by hiding, but everything you want in life is on the other side of coming out of hiding. So if you're a parent of an adolescent walking through that, I want to encourage you to set an example like my dad did, to actually be honest with your child and to model vulnerability. I tell people, vulnerability catalyzes vulnerability. The best way to encourage it in a group is to start it. And it's a biblical command. If we're like living in churches who just talk about the goodness of Jesus without talking about the sin of us, we don't really understand the goodness of Jesus because we're not being honest about who we actually are. But a lot of the joy of gospel comes when you can be honest about your brokenness. Now, of course, it doesn't stop there, right? The great thing about that house in college was that they met me in my sin, but they also called me out of it. That's what brothers and sisters in Christ do. So on that point, a book there that I would recommend actually on this, Kurt Thompson's The Soul of Shame. If you've never read it, he's a Christian psychologist, and he does some great work on why we hide. Like, what is it in our actual neurology and psychology that causes us to, and why confessional communities, as he calls them, is one of the great antidotes to our brokenness. So he's out of Northern Virginia. He does some really neat psychology work. So just if you want to think more about confession and coming out of hiding, check that out. The second point that I sort of already mentioned, but I want to dwell on for a minute, is modeling that. And I especially want to talk to the older people in the room. When my dad caught me in my sin and yet modeled grace and gentleness, and then when he is actually vulnerable to me, he showed me a version of the gospel that was not this sort of, as you get older, you just get stronger and you're totally righteous and no one has problems. He showed me that actually the way you walk with Jesus is walking as a broken person and looking up to him. There's a beautiful book that came out a couple years ago. I'm sure many of you have read it, called Gentle and Lowly. Anybody read it? Lots of hands. If you haven't, you should go get it, because the verse I would give you here is 1 Corinthians 11:1, where Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." Seeing my dad and other men at UVA, so both older, like all these guys were older than me. Some were way older than me. Some were just older than me. So just sort of want to talk to that stage of life for a second. If you are in this church and you're in a different season of life, I just want to encourage you, lean down to whether this is your children or younger people around you. And this could be like you're in college and they're in high school. This could be like you're in your early 30s and they're just out of college. Lean down and model that sort of gentle and lowly walk with the Lord that says, hey, you can be broken and still walk with Jesus. We're not perfect. Seeing people lean down and do that really called me higher. And I'll tell you, just in my age, I long for older men to do that with me now still. Like, everybody is waiting for somebody to ask them to be mentored. Like, I would, so if you're older, like, reach down and do that. If you're younger, reach up and just ask somebody. But that kind of gentle and lowly community across ages will really change you. And then third, and I want to talk to the people that my age now, if you're like in a stage of life where you think, oh my gosh, with young children, I'm just too busy for this kind of stuff. I want to encourage you there that just to cling to that rhythm. I recommended an hour a week of friendship. What I find in my life is that people they cease to go to those places that used to hold them because they feel so busy. And my simple advice there is to start up something, show up at something, and speak up. So I've got some friends in my friend group who are great at just insisting that we hang out. Like my friend Matt is wonderful at this. So if I haven't seen him for 2 or 3 weeks, I start to get angry text messages, like missed calls. Like, he's like, what are we doing? Like, we're going to hang out this Tuesday. We're going to get back on track. And if you can be that person in your friend group, we all need a person to say, like, hey, our small group kind of fell off this season. Like, we stopped meeting. Let's get back to it. start something up, but show up. This is a big part of life, I have learned, especially in busy seasons, is just show up. Just say like, yes, the kids are exhausted and we're behind schedule and dinner might not happen tonight, but we're supposed to go to small group. Like, let's just show up. Or we're supposed to go to the men's group. Let's just show up. Or speak up. Sometimes you show up, but you don't speak up. I mean, nothing happens if we don't actually get here and talk about our life. So whether you're the one to start it up, show up, or speak up, I think of those and cling to those rhythms. I think of the verse here, Ecclesiastes 4:12, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. I like that because the implication is a cord of 1 is. And that's the reality. It is so easy to be broken by life that you need other people. You need other people to just hang on. And there are lifelines. My text chain actually with my friend Steve and Matt, our shortcut name for it is 3 strands. Just because I see them as the people without whom I would be so easily broken. And, the touch points it's little now. Like we're in the stage of life where we're all really busy, but that simple art of showing up and speaking up, and thanks to Matt starting it up, getting us together, is incredible. So the book I would recommend there is what I already said, but Bonhoeffer's Life Together. If you haven't read it, you got to. If you haven't read it in a long time, you read it again. It's as good as you remember it was. So I would love to just sort of back up now and open up to any and all questions, whether you got questions about practicalities of this, stages of this. Is this mine?
It is.
Lovely. Or if you want,
I'm coming up because if you have a question, I'm going to give you the mic because we're trying to record this. Some people weren't able to be here, and that way be able to watch it later and hear the Q&A. So if you got a question, raise your hand. I'll come to you with the microphone.
You can also ask Andrew questions about me or me questions about Andrew, just to keep it spicy.
It's all fair game in the efforts toward vulnerability.
Yeah, I remember a very vulnerable time where I found out that Andrew could yell and say bad words because I can't remember what we did. I think you were driving home in a youth group van.
Which time?
We were driving home from Covenant College, I think.
Okay.
You'd probably not slept for days because of us.
Yeah.
And one of us, it might have been me, like filled up a bag right behind your head and just like popped it as you're driving. And you just like popped off on us. I was like, ooh, he's mad.
I'm sure it's true. I don't doubt it. One of the things that, think of questions, because it's great to ask the questions. One of the things that I think of that he said that I just want to reinforce is, and I was thinking of this in the last song that we were singing today, like those of us who have kids, we cling to that song, The Blessing, right? God and his faithfulness to the generations and generations and generations. And those of us who have kids that are currently walking with Jesus, we're like, yes, thank you. And those of us who have kids that aren't or are mixed, we're like, I wish this were true. But what I want you to hear is even in Justin's own story, life isn't static, and nor is the trajectory just linear. Like, it's up and down because this is life in this world that's fallen and broken. The key to that is making sure that those relationships stay intact and keep pointing people to Jesus. Not to be more perfect like Jesus is, that's in heaven, but and our growth is up and down and back and forth. And my dad is 85 years old, and he was here for a while at the church before they moved to different town. It was great to have him on staff with us and to be an encourager. And I asked him one time, so at this time he was probably, 79 or 80. I was like, so what's it like just sin and struggling? Like, you pretty good now? And he goes, no. I'm like, that's not good news, Dad. So the whole life is like, I need Jesus. And so I want us to remember that. And remember that, yeah, God is faithful. But he does those things in his time. And there's lots of hard seasons to life. And what Justin is saying, and what we're saying, what Jesus was saying, is you can't do that well without people. And you won't, because you're made that way. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're doing this. It's interesting, as he was talking about this, I read Bonhoeffer's book this summer for the first time I've ever read it, on Life Together. And then I read The Soul of Shame this fall. And it was part of what we were thinking about as we were going through the fall and thinking about what series are coming up. We're like, we need to do something on community because of the isolation in the world and the loneliness people feel. And so that's why we're focusing on that this spring and brought Justin in to talk about it. What questions do you have?
As you're going through different transitions in your life, once from your leaving your parents and going off to college and becoming responsible for yourself and your own faith from taking place, and then also, that's the first question. The second question is your transition from the friends that you had where you're getting drunk and doing the cigarettes, burns, and those type of things, to your new friends, and how'd that transition go? How'd you process through that? And do you still have a relationship with those that you made that transition from?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm going to answer in reverse order. Yes, so I was texting yesterday the friend who we mutually burned each other, because I've remained friends with those people, at least so we were all in a band together, and we remained like close
And
in touch.
what's the name of the band?
It was Crash Everest.
Crash Everest.
Yeah. What was neat is that as I sort of like moved out of being in the inner circle of those relationships such that they were forming me, and I moved into the House of Pain where I started to get formed in Christian community, a big part of what I learned from them was that like we're not here to be safe and protected and closed off. It was like that last point I tried to share, that actually our covenant friendship with each other sends us out into the world. And so they were the kind of people that were like, stay friends with those guys and walk with them. In that group of guys, I have seen actually each one of them move towards either Christ or health at different times. And so we've been friends since college. And none of them are where I would like them to be. But one of them, because of a lot of our texting, got sober a year ago. One of them actually started walking with the Lord in college and like started coming to our college ministry. One of them I'm actually just having spiritual conversations with now, because after 15 some years, he's like, tell me more about that thing you believe. So the Lord plays the long game with a lot of us. And I consider it a privilege to still be in those relationships, actually, even though they cease to be the center of my life, because there was a reality of like, I can't go to all the same places that they're going. I got to live differently. And that kind of answers the first question. I think one of the things that transition from youth group in high school to UVA taught me was that if you're following Jesus, wherever you go, you need to look for those people around you that you can be covenant friends with. And I wouldn't have had words for this when I went to China, but I was starting to intuit it because of what my friends at UVA had taught me. And so when I moved to China, I just sort of intuited that, okay, I need to find a couple guys here who I can really be known by. And I did. And, it was really neat in China. I mean, we're all feeling like exiles, right? Because we're living in China. We're being secret about our missionary work. We kind of knew that we needed each other, but it wasn't a given that we found each other. And me and a couple other guys, there's a guy named John Rude, there's a guy named Cam. There was a couple others that I just really clung to there. And so one of the point of that is that in transitions in life, like the Lord very well might call you to go across the world, or he might call you to a different place or call you to a different job. And you might have to leave your community to do that. But in those transitions, I think one of the first things that a disciple of Jesus thinks about is, who are my new people here? Like, who's in proximity that I can cling to? And that's made a lot of difference. I see. I think, yeah.
I don't know if it's actually a question, but I've been thinking a lot about so I started working at a high school, and I'm seeing kids every day, and it's, there's just, you see on social media, it's like they just want to be known. Mm-hmm. And what you said about snacking versus feasting. Yeah. And like C.S. Lewis's thing about the mud pies. I don't know, there's something about mud pies when you could be having, you know what I'm talking about. Yep. Anyway, how do we as believers excite this new generation or friends or neighbors or whatever about something they don't know that they don't know? Mm-hmm. You know, I
Yeah.
know we model it, but with technology, it's just like how do you compete against that, I guess?
Yeah, well, I'll try to give you some encouragement. My answer is teach it and model it, i.e. be really specific about it, but also show it off. Show it off, I think, is kind of what we've been talking about, but it's worth a little more. I mean, the church should be a place where we use technology differently because of what we believe. And I think this is an incredible point for missions and evangelism right now. Most people that I see are floundering, baby boomers and teenagers. Do you know baby boomers are more likely to pull out their phone at the dinner table, actually, than Gen Zers and Gen Xers are? So this is not, I say with technology, we're all adolescents because it came out. You know, the iPhone was released right around 2008. You know, doing math in public, I'm not great at that. That puts us all about, 16 years old with the iPhone? So, I don't know, are the 16-year-olds that you know making great decisions in their life? Typically not. We're all pretty new at this, right? And one of the most, I think, evangelistic, missional things that we can do in the church is to say, we have different norms for this. I happen to send my kids to a Christian school in Richmond, and one of the neat conversations that we're having, you can have this, it doesn't have to be a Christian school, you can have this with your parents at your school. It's like, how do we want our norms of technology to be different so that it's a lot harder to say, hey, we're not going to let you get on social media until you're in 10th grade or something, when everybody else's families are like, 6th grade, here's Facebook, So we're talking as a community of what are our norms going to be? And I think it's the Wild West right now. But it would be amazing if the church was a place where we said, yeah, we use our phones differently. We turn them off. We don't look for our vulnerable community on Facebook or Instagram, because those are great places for snacks and connections. But we do these things called small groups. We do these things called accountability groups. We go on these weird things called mission trips together, where you're in radical presence with each other. Showing that off, I think, is just what the church ought to do. But it takes a lot of countercultural thought. Because again, the current of life is to become busier, wealthier people who used to have friends. And a lot of that is the current of technology. The rhythms that you'll be shepherded into. For some of you, this might be cable news. For some of you, this might be Twitter. For some of you, this might be TikTok or whatever. But you've got to live radically different rhythms. And then, so model it differently, but also speak up. I talk to parents a lot now because my second book was on habits in the household. And I just am like, look, you're the parent. So you got to make the hard decision to say, live differently. I'm going to make the rules. And of course our children don't like this. But you got to make the rules. And I was speaking at Liberty University on Friday. Any Liberty grads here? Okay. Okay. I was just telling Andrew before this, I was invited to speak there only a couple weeks ago. I thought I was speaking at a college chapel, which I've done before. I did not realize, 2 days before I met a Liberty student, and I was like, I'm speaking at Liberty's chapel on Friday. They were like convocation? And I was like, I don't know what that is. Is it the weekly chapel? And they're like, yeah, it's called convocation, whole student body, 8,000 people. I was like, I'm sorry, what? They're like, yeah, if you're speaking at Liberty, you're speaking at this thing. I was like, I looked it up online. I'm seeing a basketball arena of thousands of students. I had no idea that's what I was about to get into. Okay. I talked to them about technology rhythms, about turning off their phones, about reading scripture before they go to their phones. I talked to them about friendship. And they were interrupting with applause, which is not normal for me. Usually I'm talking to quiet Presbyterian churches that we're used to, right? But I was amazed that they also know something is wrong. They're not wild out in left field, but they also want help. They also want rules that help put them in the way. And so modeling it, but also being specific about it, I do think actually be encouraged. I think the younger generation knows this is not life and life to the full, but they're looking for somebody to show them what is. So show them and tell them and live it out.
I have a question. Oh, there's one right here too.
And then
I'll ask
Brittany
mine
can
and
go.
let Brittany ask hers too.
Okay.
If somebody is needing friends, and they're in church and they're like, man, I really need some friends like this. I don't have this. Can you talk about how somebody needing a friend and being a friend, and like how do you find people and come together and make that work when you're like feel like you're desperately on the needy end of it? What do you do?
You know, I know a church like this, and any healthy church will have formats for engagement, right? So the showing up part is easy, but I think like finding a small group and being honest about whatever it is you have to be honest about, those are spark points. Sometimes it's because you come to the small group and you're saying, you know what, we've been talking about community. It made me realize that I'm living alone, and there's some issues in my life. And you start to talk about what's actually going on. And from that side, often it sparks this, like, the other person on the other side of the room who's been like, I have been waiting for somebody to talk like this. Because vulnerability catalyzes vulnerability. And so you can be a great leader by being that person who shows up and speaks like that. Because somebody else is out there saying, like, I need this. And now I just want to say, like, I'm putting my hands like this for a reason. You can also flip that. Like, that person who's like, I'm in need of people, can also be the person that shows up and just says, like, you know, I'm sort of dying out here. And now I also just want to address the honest dynamic that some of us are better at making friends than others, and some of us are quite bad at it. Some of us knew early in high school that, like, we were awkward people who, like, have trouble with this. I certainly was in that camp. I've gotten better at it, but you know, one of the most beautiful things about the body of Christ is that we don't look for, or we shouldn't, you know, your social acumen or your accolades or what you can do or have done as the mark of, oh, that's a potential friend. We look to confessing the name of Jesus and being willing to worship him together as the mark of what we bond over. And I think some of the most beautiful things about the church groups, the missionary groups, the ministries that I've been a part of is the wild diversity of EQ. You know, there's all kinds of people who, some of them are, you know, popular guys on the football team. Some of them are the guys who would have been beat up if they weren't pulled into the youth group and protected. And I just think, you know, acknowledging that dynamic and saying we're the kind of people who seek out and pull in the vulnerable, whether it's actually vulnerable, whether it's poverty, whether it's racism, whether it's just socially vulnerable. Like, that's a beautiful thing when the church does that. But I do think vulnerability sparks it. So I would encourage you to be the kind of person who looks and says, I want to make people comfortable here, and then I want to pull them in. Because that is such a witness to the gospel. And it's often the way that people get drawn closer to Jesus, because you draw them closer to you. Brittany,
Okay, so, I hate the microphone. So Justin and I were in Andrew's youth group together, and I think it's funny that you said that you felt like you were like the nerdy kid coming in with your t-shirt tucked in, because I remember thinking Justin was like the coolest guy in the youth group.
I don't think you remember the first couple
because
years.
Justin, I'm a couple years older than you, but I was like the uber super sheltered homeschool girl. So, like, I just remember our nerdiness worked so well together, and I'm just so daggone proud of you, and coming here today has been really great. So thank you. Here's my question. So I don't remember how old your boys are, but I think that they're not teenage yet, right?
No,
like your
yeah, they're
boys
5,
are
6,
younger. Okay.
9, and 11.
So having younger kids, and talking about friendships, how do you shepherd and foster their friendships and encourage them? And because it's a tricky age, like they have their school friends, and like they can't go and, you know, hang out and create their own play dates. So like, how do you and your wife foster that?
I love this question so much, because one of my great hopes is that my boys will become friends of each other. I just think the most beautiful thing that can happen as a family is you're not just people who live around each other, that you start to become friends who live with each other. So a couple ways that I think about it. First, I do think a lot about teaching them the art of conversation, which is primarily, you know, the medium of covenant friendship. I mean, everybody knows, like, doing things together is a lot of the ways that you find out commonalities, but when you start to turn and actually relate to each other about your faith, about your struggles, about something else, that's where you really start to dig in. And so, for example, at family dinner, which is a rhythm of ours, we, like, every night are like, give me a high from your day, give me a low from your day, tell us something interesting about your day. Why do we do that? Because otherwise I say, how was your day? They're like, fine, you know. And this is how many of us live, husbands and wives included. Like, we actually don't know how to disclose our inner life to each other. And so right now, we do this teeth-pulling process at the dinner table of like, Whit, my 11-year-old, tell me something good about today. And they'll typically be like PE. And like, not quite enough. Like, give me some details, like something good socially that happened. And it's just like practicing, helping with them learn the art of conversation, right? Very young age. Another thing is that like while I'm teaching them that, and trying to teach them conversation, I'm letting them watch all the time. So one of my favorite things to do is when my friends come over, is let the boys stay up a little late. Or just let them see. Like usually, instead of shepherding them to bed, like, hey, I need to hang out, I like let them hang around so they see me interacting with my friends. Not that they're gonna, I don't learn anything, that they could name, but that so that they intuit a father or like a man, a woman, my mom. It's normal for them to interact with other people. And I'll tell my boys if I'm going to leave before bedtime something, I'm going to hang out with your Uncle Matt and Uncle Steve, or I'm going to hang out with my brother. And so I just want them to see that this is what we do. And, this is the same with small groups and with church gatherings. When they watch you be a person who needs each other, I think we teach them that this is the format of life. And then one last thing, just one last practice, because we were thinking about this recently. One of my sons, Asher, was like, I don't want to play soccer this year. I was like, that's fine. Like, all of your friends are on the soccer team. Like, are you sure you don't want to hang out with them? And he's like, I'm not loving soccer. I was like, okay, I'm not going to make you do that. What thing do you want to do? Here are the things where your friends are. And I was like, pick one of these. So it wasn't like, oh, okay, you just don't want to go. It was like, we're going to teach you to be in rhythms of places where you'll encounter people. And he was like, a baseball. And I was like, cool. Like, your best friend Warner is on that team. Like, you can play on this. But I'm not thinking like, hey, you have to play sports. I'm thinking you've got to be in the way of friendship. And it's similar with youth group or Sunday school. It's like I pick these rhythms for them now because I'm their parent and hope that they'll intuit them later. But so put them in the way of friendship, teach them conversation, and let them see your relationship. Habits of the household. You should, yes, you should go get that one. That was my second book, and it's one whole chapter is on conversation. So like lots of the things that I just mentioned are in there. Yeah.
Then you also put, you can prop this later, but you do devotionals and things like that people can use if you want to look on his webpage and stuff like that.
Yeah,
There's some other things other than just books, if you're interested in that. Any other questions? We maybe have time for one more question.
I'll try to be quick and see if we can do both of these.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so when it comes to relationships and showing up vulnerably, I've found just recently through a few different times in my life, but where I've showed up and I thought that we were in this relationship where we shared things, and then found out some really unexpected things from the other person that they were keeping from me. And so how do you navigate relationships where you're showing up and you're doing all the things that all the things that you're laying out, and then the other person just isn't there?
Like not meeting you halfway?
Yeah, or yeah.
Yeah.
Like, they're willing to listen to you, but they're not sharing things about them. So then the relationship feels very off.
Okay, I got you. And I'm glad you asked this, because this is a really important point to address. One, it takes two to tango, so to speak. Like, right? It takes two people to walk in friendship. And sometimes that kind of vulnerability that I'm talking about is you've got to find the right person to share it with. Like I tried to say, it's not anyone, it's not everyone, it's not all the time. One of the ways I think that to practice this is like in a relationship where you think, okay, it might work here, is to share a little bit about something and see how that person handles it. And it's not to say you're interviewing them or you're testing them, but it's just to be responsible. Because sometimes the things that we have to be vulnerable about are like our deepest wounds, right? Our scars. And if there's no response from that person, I mean, and this can be painful and true. Like there's some guys I've tried to open up to and it's like, I'm not getting anywhere. And you can't force it. And I do think that's a sign, okay, maybe this isn't it, and maybe some of the things that you have to share, this isn't the right place for it if they're not responding, but that doesn't mean stop there. I mean, just like any relationship, like I said earlier, our only option is to be friends with sinners. So try and pray and see if there are other people who would, who would. But last point there, be gracious, because again, you only have friends that are sinners. So sometimes it's a long time before they get it. Sometimes they're not in that place. And sometimes people will hurt you, and you got to be like, it's not because you did the wrong thing, it's because they're a sinner. So be gracious to them the way that the Lord was gracious to you.
They might be more willing one-on-one than if it's in a small group. And if they're not one-on-one, then I think you kind of got this barrier there. But I'm going to go to the next question here.
Mine's really short,
Okay.
but my son's a Liberty grad, or at Liberty now. So,
Oh, at Liberty now?
yeah, he was at convocation.
He was?
Yeah, and he
What
said
did he say?
he can't.
Don't tell me what he said.
Oh no,
Just kidding.
I'm going to tell you what he said. So he can't buy anything without calling me to use a credit card. So he said, "Hey, can I buy The Common Rule by this guy Justin Whitmel, Earley from Amazon?" So I said, "Yes." He said, "Thank you. The author's speaking in Convo today. He sounds like he's figured it out, what I'm trying to figure out. He lives in Richmond, and I kind of want to look him up next time I'm in town." Whereupon I replied, "He's spoken at our church." "He has? Was I there that day?" And I said, "You really ought to ask Andrew." And then this morning I said, "Hey, Justin Earley is preaching at our church today." And he said, "If you get a chance to see him, tell him I really appreciated his talk at Convocation."
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Thank you for reading that.
Thanks, Bruce.
And tell him I said hi.
We do need to wrap up, to let you go. If you want to hang out for a couple more minutes and ask questions, you probably could, but be respectful of Justin's time. I have another question that I don't know that we can really get to, unless you want to try to briefly answer that. But I think, and it's this.
I can try.
And I'll let you guys reflect on it too. He talked some about spiritual life and growth, right? Being vulnerable and sharing sins and forgiving one another. And he talked about his body and his physical health at times. And he talks about people that are spiritually healthy or physically healthy. And I think one of the huge mistakes we make in the church is we separate those two things. We bifurcate them and say those are different worlds and they don't touch one another. And that's not true, because we're made body and soul. And so what you do spiritually affects you physically, and what's happening to you physically impacts you spiritually. What would you say about that?
I would just affirm that's really true, and say that in our relationships, we're calling people both ways. I mean, so friends with mental health struggles. I'm not just saying how's your walk with the Lord? How's your time in scriptures? I'm saying are you exercising? Are you sleeping? Are you drinking too much? Are you because I know that lifestyle affects their walk with the Lord. And I also know that their walk with the Lord affects their lifestyle. Yeah. And I think, some of the greatest joys of my life are having friends to work out with and friends to be vulnerable with, and they kind of go vice versa. Yeah. So I love the idea of, community affects you physically. The Surgeon General's report is showing us, surprise, relationships affect your body. And if you don't have them, your body starts to break down. And Christianity knows your body affects your soul. This is why we have sexual ethics. This is why we treat our body a certain way. This is why we commands against getting drunk. We affirm that God created us body and soul, and good communities will nurture both.
Thanks. There's a book that I have not read that I've heard is good. You probably have read it because you're an author and you read. The Body Keeps Score, I think is the
Body
name?
Keeps the Score. It's on my desk right now. Yeah.
See? So there you go. Okay, so that might be one to check out. If you want to hang out and ask questions for a minute, do so. But if you need to go. You're free to go. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Justin, for coming.
You bet. Thank you all for
Appreciate you so
having me.
much.
Oh, let's do it. Yes.